Hey Exalts, Brassbug341 here with another meta report. The meta has shifted quite a bit during the first two World Championship qualifiers, and hopefully this report is just in time for you to make some changes for the third one in Essen. Let's have a look at all the changes. We gathered data from 9 large events, 2 of which were World Championship qualifiers. They are the most important events in altered history so far, so people were taking the tournaments very seriously. This data is gathered from 39 cards, and only shows decks that reached the top 16 or 32. Sigismar is back after a short dip during the Whispers from the Maze launch. With 38 entries making it to the top, it is once again the most represented hero at events. Looks like the constant pressure and consistency is still too hard to beat. Afanas and Kojo follow closely with 31 and 27 entries respectively. Treyst has made a surprising return, with 14 entries and a win at Lille. Rounding up the top 5 is Ven, with 12 entries. The top 3 are pretty close, with a gap between them and the remaining 2. It's also worth noting that Waru remains in limbo, him being the only hero that wasn't represented at all. Odds are, he won't be making a return before the new heroes of Skybound Odyssey, the 4th set, are introduced. But which of these heroes went on into the top 4? That's what we're going to look at with this slide. Sigismar is still at the top, with 8 entries. Kojo and Afanas follow with 5 entries each, and Treyst and Sierra close the top 5 with 4 and 3 entries respectively. It's worth noting that Navenka made it into the top 4 at Lille, a huge tournament with 600 players. She also qualified for the World Championships. A very unexpected addition to the lineup. Once again, we see Sigismar is back on top. This time, the advantage is clearer. If we break it down to factions, however, we see that Axiom is actually not that far off Ortis, with their 7 entries only losing out by 1. Muna clearly struggles with a more removal-heavy meta. It's the only faction that didn't make it into the top 4 at all. All in all, the spread is more varied than before, with the exception of the loss of Muna. For this, we gave each hero that placed first 3 points, second place got 2 points, third place was awarded 1 point, and fourth place got 0 points. This means that decks can have 0 points despite making it into the top 4, as is the case with Ven and Basura. Sigismar is still king, with a whopping 16 points. Then, there's a bit of a shift. Treyst makes it to second place, with 11 points. Then, Sierra and Afanas tie for third place with 6 points. Lindai closes the top 5 with 3 points. Both Afanas and Kojo have a huge drop, with Kojo making a considerable drop to a mere 2 points despite the 5 entries in the top 4. Treyst, on the other hand, only had 4 entries but managed to climb with an impressive 11 points. Is she back after the suspension and subsequent nerf of Haven? Previous numbers don't take into account how much each deck is played, so we normalized them to give a fairer representation by dividing the scores by the amount of entries they have. This does mean that a single deck doing well makes a big difference, so it isn't perfect, but it will allow us to look at all the data from a different perspective. Suddenly, we see Lindai and Gulrang all the way at the top, each with a single deck scoring first place for 3 points. Treyst is close, scoring 2.75 points per entry, meaning it won multiple events. Sigismar, on the other hand, averages at 2 points per entry. Sierra, Etsadi, and Aurak also average on 2 points each, but with far less entries. Sierra still has a respectable 6, but Etsadi and Aurak each only have a single entry. Afanas drops all the way to 8th place, averaging just above 3rd place at events with 1.2 points. Acacia also makes its way onto the podium, with 2 decks making it into 3rd place. Everything else generally landed 4th. Now, let's have a look at the most played cards for the top represented heroes, starting with Sigismar. I'll make a quick note here that I mentioned Baba Yaga had dropped off the list. This is because the card is suspended, a change that went past me. Let's also do some maths. We went through 8 decks. Assuming each deck has 39 cards, that means there's a total of 312 cards. This means that each card will be about 0.32% of the total cards. At 2.56%, a card averages at a single entry per deck. At 7.69%, the card appears in each deck a total of 3 times. This percentage will actually always be the same, regardless of sample size. We start out with some staples. Ortis Trooper and Ortis Attorney rare, as well as License Withdrawal common, are triple inclusions in every deck. Ortis Trooper is the best stat 1-drop in the entire game, so there's no big surprise here. At 2 mana, Ortis Attorney can block Buddha perfectly for a draw. With a decent stat line, she can be used both aggressively for a step or defensively for a draw. And with straight stats, blocking is relatively easy. License Withdrawal is the only new card that has become a 3-off staple. At 3 mana, it can discard dangerous threats like a Mage Dancer or a Nancy, skipping reserve so you don't make card disadvantage in the process. Alternatively, you can discard a key landmark like the Mess, Haven, or the Nylum. Teamwork Training remains some of the best removal in the game, but it looks like there's been a slight drop as someone cut it down to a 2-off. That means Sigismar players are consistently running at least 5 removal cards, and most of them run 6. Add in the Sandman, which averages just below 2 copies per deck, and you'll see the control side of Sigismar is quite heavy. Even Jack Frost and Monolith Legged, both approaching 3 copies per deck, aim to sabotage your opponent's recourses, and the 2 Ortis Spies add to this. This makes sense because your own recourse management is limited and inconsistent. Ortis Attorney only draws when you don't win an expedition, and Field Reinforcements requires you to be behind or tied on both expeditions. A strong play on turn 1, but it dies off after that. Unsurprisingly, the card averages out at a mere 1 per list. Gift of Self, on the other hand, has you sacrifice one of your own characters. Of course, there's always the Ortis recruit you get off of Sigismar himself, but you'll need to find a moment when it doesn't matter. With the lack of Baba Yaga, the card still sees an average of 1.5 addition per deck. The rest of the cards are mainly here for pure stats and playing on curve. Aegis Templar is a nice flexible card that you can either drop for 1 mana as a 1/1/1 or play as a 3 mana 2/2/3 that gives you a 1/1/1 for the next day. Ortis Crier is fairly weak from hand, but with just a single character from hand and a free Ortis Recruit boosting its supportability, you get a 2 mana 3/3/2 from reserve. You can even combine it with Aegis Templar from the previous turn to play from reserve at full stats immediately. Despite there being very few token spawners, at least outside uniques, the average Sigismar deck still runs a single monolith. Of course, it goes nicely with all the cheap bodies, and losing some tempo isn't always bad when you need to find a moment to conserve some recourses. Grand Endeavor, on the other hand, averages at about 0.5 cards per deck. The constant pressure is really nice against certain decks, but even with the tough from the rare, it gets removed at cost or even at a discount, making it a huge loss. The Hunger, a common one-off for Kojo, even eats it for free. Treyst has 2 versions going around at tournaments, making this list a little bit confusing at a glance. There's the Bugfix Exploiter, which requires specific, pricey uniques that many people don't have, and the more general, stable Treyst decks that are king at managing their resources once you hit 5 scrap counters. This is indicated by the 3.21% representation of Bugfix in top Treyst decks. An Exploiter deck would run 3, whilst the regular one doesn't run at all. With about an average of 1.5 per deck, that indicates the split between decks to be around 50-50. Of course, both decks have some cards that are stapled in every time. Those are Axiom Salvager rare and Amelia Earhart common. Salvager has decent stats for a 1-drop and resupplies from reserve. That means he helps you get extra scrap for Treyst, while also providing resources that tend to be better from reserve anyway. Like Amelia, which if you don't find through a resupply or dump into reserve with cards like Ada Lovelace or Kellen Elemental, usually gets turned into mana. The Grims is an interesting new addition that has some flexible uses. It can discard permanents that cost 3 or less, meaning you can clear up the Mess or a Haven basically for free. Some people even tech a single rare Grims, so you can hit key cards like Nylum, Monolith, or Messectet. Alternatively, you can sacrifice your own bug-out bag, which if fleeting has no more value anyway, for a considerable boost in power in the form of a 2/2/2 brass bug. In a pinch, You can even sacrifice a bug-out bag that isn't fleeting yet, or a Kellen Cylinder or Haven when necessary. In the olden days, Kellen Elemental was probably a staple in every Treyst deck. It helps you get the scrap counters faster, while providing good stats for just 2 mana. But with the Haven nerf, you want to manage your recourses a bit more. That's why it's been demoted to a 2-off. Similarly, Ada Lovelace Rare is averaging at 1.5 cards per deck. The common even sees some play now, with the increase in permanence in the form of Kellen Cylinder and Bug-Out Bag, meaning she can fairly consistently get you a draw despite the limitation. The Haven, Bravo's Bastion, has been reduced to a 2-off, since it's lost some considerable power after the nerf. To compensate, decks often run 1 or 2 Kellen Cylinders. It functions as an after-you for 1 mana, while also providing 1/1/1 in stats on entry. Additionally, it allows Frankenstein to be more flexible, since you'll be able to choose between stats when necessary, or a resupply for more recourses in the future. Sap Sniffer also goes well with Cylinder, allowing you to store up an extra boost and prolonging the amount of times you can score a boost in the future, or making an extra one right now if necessary. The most surprising entry on this list is Vake. She gets played 1.5 times as a common, and about 0.5 times as a rare. Vake helps you dodge exhaust slowdowns like Jack Frost or Aklut, which can be major threats to Treyst setup at the beginning, but her synergy with the deck itself is minimal. Only frozen delivery benefits off her, since you'll be able to play it twice in a turn with Vake on the board. Similarly to Treyst, there's roughly 3 versions of Afanas that might mess up the numbers on this list. First, there's the classic version that's a very middle-of-the-road mid-range deck. Then, there's the slower but more consistent version that either runs the Nylum or Nylum Spires. Finally, there's the aggressive version, which gets points early with cards like Joyride, and makes more use of Conjuring Seal to compensate for the loss of cards. Surprisingly, there's only one staple card remaining. Magical Training Rare is the only card that Afanas decks play 3 of across the board. Cheap cards are always powerful and altered, and in Afanas this is even more true. From hand, you draw a card and get 1/1/1 in stats for a single mana. Even from reserve, doing the same for a mana more is very much worth it. Additionally, playing it twice is enough for Mage Dancer Rare to get the extra card draw, really filling up your hand for future turns. Finally, all cheap spells are welcome for triggering Nylum Spires as often as possible. Off you go. Used to be a staple in every Afanas deck, and it's still pretty close. With Evanescence and License Withdrawal fighting for the same spot, some players have opted to cut one. Evanescence is better from reserve than Off You Go, while also providing Nylum players with a precious Mana Moth trigger. License Withdrawal is the only card apart from Banishing Gate that can remove permanence in an Afanas list, which automatically makes it worth considering. Also, being able to discard a boosted character can be a huge advantage, despite the spell having fleeting. Moth to a Flame is an automatic 3-off in every Nylum build, since it provides you with 3/3/3 in stats from hand, while also triggering your landmark, while providing 3/3/3 in stats for 2 from reserve, without any prerequisites. Compare this to the Ordis Crier for Sigismar, which is a 2-mana 3/3/2 if you summon 2 characters before you play it from reserve. This also makes Moth to a Flame an excellent target for Sleight of Hand to put in reserve, while simultaneously getting a significant discount or extra use off cards such as Magical Training, Conjuring Seal, or even Rime Frost. Another excellent card to put in reserve with Sleight of Hand is Studious Disciple, which, while being nice as a 1-drop, is on the weaker side compared to other 1-mana cards. The discount on spells, on the other hand, can be really nice, especially when it comes as a surprise due to Sleight of Hand. Finally, Sleight of Hand has Cooldown, which does have the downside that you can't play it twice in a turn, sometimes clogging up your reserve and causing you to lose a card during cleanup. But it also triggers Nylum, meaning it occasionally generates 3/3/3 in stats for a single mana. Khadidra Mage Dancer is still a 3-off, but not necessarily as a rare. The draw is nice, but the rare slots in Afanas are highly contested, so some players opt to run in common, or at least downgrade one or two of them. Joyride is the most aggressive card on this list, generating 3/3/3 in stats for a single mana. With cooldown, it can also trigger your Nylum for an additional 2/2/2, totaling a whopping 5/5/5 for 1 mana. The downside is mitigated by sacrificing cards that are too expensive from reserve, like Conjuring Seal or Off You Go. But even then, it does cut into your resources, especially if you play it from reserve as well. This is why the card is mostly found in aggressive lists and doesn't make much appearances in the other versions. Finally, we have Sierra. Judging by the cards here, top players aren't trying to trigger Sierra every turn. Instead, they use her ability to compensate for a setup turn so you don't really fall behind on tempo. This allows you to get big permanents online that will start winning you the game. Unsurprisingly, Foundry Mechaniccommon and Brassbug Hive Rare are both mainstays. Brassbug Hive is a huge threat, creating 2/3/3/3 Brassbugs the turn it enters thanks to Sierra's own ability, then a free 3/3/3 every turn. A second Hive even upgrades those further to 4/4/4. This is a lot of free bodies that your opponent has to deal with every turn. And because you already generate 2 characters when you play the Hive, even if your opponent can remove it, there's still a significant problem to deal with. Founder Mechanic also makes a lot of sense. It allows you to get Hive or Nylum online a turn early, which is the main game plan for Sierra. Thanks to Sierra lists running both Nylum and Brassbug Hive, Mechanical Training is a really flexible card. It can either simply create a Brassbug, which will be 3/3/3 at least, or it functions as a Rime Frost, exhausting a card in your opponent's reserve and spawning a 2/2/2 mana moth. It doesn't have cooldown either, so you can play it again in the same day. This is most useful with Hive, though freezing 2 cards can be very disruptive as well, even if they're spread out over 2 turns. The robots have interesting synergy with both landmarks. Brassbug Hive is simple. They're robots, and Hive gives your robots an extra boost. The Nylum is where it gets interesting. When you exhaust a robot at noon for an extra boost, you trigger Nylum as well. This means you don't need to look for a trigger, allowing you to carry out your game plan as usual. Sierra's options for card advantage are limited. Hooked gives you some precious draw, and Frozen Delivery is pretty good as well. Since a landmark doesn't mind being played from reserve, it's practically a draw when you find one. Bug Out Bag does give you some extra resupply, and since you're playing Sierra, you get an extra Brassbug as well. But apart from a stray Dredger Drone and some Axiom Salvagers, those are your card advantage options, which is tough for a deck revolving around finding and playing your expensive landmark. This is the main reason why lists run the Nylum. It functions as a substitute or temporary placeholder until you find your Hives. You also create an extra Brassbug on top of the Mana Moth, meaning it essentially functions as an Oklut in Kojo. Avalanche can be pretty powerful if you wait for the right moment. Hitting multiple anchored characters against Muna can be a huge swing, while you can really hurt Sigismar by removing an Ortis Attorney, a Monolith Legate, and an Ortis Recruit with a single spell. All Frog Princes are thrown in for free as well. But the 3 mana cost does make it hard to use because you need all of those targets on the board before you drop too low. We hope this meta report helps you get some insight into the current meta, what's being played, and how to adapt to it. We'd like to thank Sheik of TCG Tribe for providing the statistics and Arran of DNA Games for sharing his insight. If you want to see more from him, you can find a link to his website in the description. We'd also like to thank Arts and Crap for helping with the designs. You can find a link to her Etsy store in the description as well, together with our own Etsy store link where we provide some nice designs for altar accessories. Let us know if you like this new form with a deeper analysis, and if my new voice is an improvement compared to the old one. We'd love to read about it in the comments. Good luck if you're attending the World Championship Qualifier in Essen, and we hope to see you soon.